My sister Tiana thought banning me from her wedding was the ultimate power move. She believed she could erase me from her perfect day to keep her dark secrets hidden from her wealthy new-in-laws. She was wrong. When the security guard turned me away at the gate, I did not scream. I did not make a scene. I simply left a small black velvet box at the checkpoint and drove away. I sat in my car 5 miles down the road and waited. 3 hours later, my phone exploded. My sister was not calling to say thank you. She was screaming because the police had just walked onto the dance floor to arrest her husband. Before I tell you what was inside that box, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments if you have ever been the family scapegoat who held the keys to the truth. It started 40 minutes earlier, under the brutal heat of the Georgia sun. I sat idling in my silver Mercedes convertible at the entrance of the historic estate my parents had rented. This was the social event of the season in Atlanta. My parents had leveraged every favor and secretly maxed out every credit card to secure this venue. I smoothed the emerald silk of my dress and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like money. I looked like success. But to the man in the guard booth, I apparently looked like a threat. The guard was a heavy-set man with a badge that caught the glare of the sun. He stepped out of the booth and walked slowly toward my car. He did not smile. He did not greet me with the southern hospitality my parents had paid thousands of dollars for. He just held up a hand to stop me. "Name," he barked while staring down at a clipboard. "Keisha Vance," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I am the bride's sister." He scanned the list once, then twice. His eyes flicked to my car, then back to me with a look I knew too well. A look that mixed suspicion with dismissal. "You are not on the list, ma'am. Please turn around." Behind me, a line of luxury cars began to form. A black Bentley pulled up directly on my bumper, and the couple inside stared at me with impatient disdain. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame, but from pure, unadulterated rage. "I am not mistaken," I said, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Check again. Look under immediate family." The guard chuckled, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "Lady, I have checked 3 times. I have a Tiana Vance and a Marcus and Patricia Vance. There is no Keisha. You are not on the list, and this is a private event. If you are not on the list, you are trespassing." The word hung in the air, heavy and accusing. Trespassing. At my own sister's wedding. I saw the woman in the Bentley whisper something to her husband, and they both laughed. They were probably wondering why the woman in the expensive car was being turned away like a desperate party crasher. My stomach twisted into a knot. This was not an administrative error. This was a calculated public humiliation orchestrated by my mother, Patricia. She knew I would come. She knew I would try to take the high road, and she wanted to make sure I hit a wall before I could even park my car. The guard tapped on my hood. "Ma'am, you need to clear the lane. Now." I looked at the grand iron gates that were closed to me, and I realized something. They did not just want me absent, they wanted me erased. But they forgot that I was the one who paid for the very ground they were standing on. I pressed the call button on the steering wheel and listened to the ring. 1 ring, 2 rings. Inside the car, the silence was absolute, magnified by the hum of the air conditioning. Inside my chest, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. On the 3rd ring, the line connected. "Hello," came Tiana's voice, but she was not speaking to me. She was laughing. I could hear the clinking of champagne glasses and the raucous chatter of her bridesmaids. It sounded like a celebration I was never meant to be part of. "Tiana," I said, my voice cutting through the static. "The guard says I am not on the list. Tell him to let me in." There was a pause, and then I heard the distinct click of the speakerphone being activated. "Oh, guys, hush for a second," Tiana announced to the room, her voice echoing slightly. "It is Keisha. She is actually at the gate trying to get in." A chorus of giggles erupted. It was a sound that transported me back to high school, back to every time my sister and her friends had made me the punchline of their jokes. I could imagine them perfectly. Tiana in her silk robe surrounded by flowers holding court, while her friends looked at the phone like it was a fascinating insect. Tiana's voice returned, dripping with mock sympathy. Oh, sweetie, did you think it was a mistake? We did not forget you, Keisha. We excluded you. The cruelty was so casual it took my breath away. Why, I asked simply. Because Brayden does not want you here, Tiana sneered. He says you are bad energy. You are always watching him, judging him with those cold auditor eyes of yours. This is a day for love and family, Keisha, and let us be honest, you have never really fit into either of those categories, have you? Then I heard another voice, a voice that had dictated my entire life. My mother, Patricia. Give me the phone, Tiana. I heard rustling, and then my mother's sharp tone pierced my ear. Keisha, turn that car around right now. Do not make a scene. We have important people here. Brayden's investors are here. We cannot have you walking around with your cheap department store dress and your judgmental attitude making everyone uncomfortable. You are a stain on this day. You are an embarrassment. A stain. That was what I was to them. Not a daughter, not a sister who had secretly paid off their credit card debt 3 times. A stain. Mom, please, I started to say, but Tiana grabbed the phone back. Yeah, go home, Keisha. Nobody wants you here. You are just jealous because I am marrying a millionaire, and you are going to die alone with your spreadsheets. Do yourself a favor and save the little dignity you have left. Just drive away. The line went dead. I sat there staring at the dashboard while the dial tone hummed in the empty air. The humiliation should have crushed me. My hands should have been shaking. But they were steady, stone steady. They wanted me to leave. Fine. But I was not leaving without giving them exactly what they deserved. Most people in my position would have lost control. They would have screamed at the guard or tried to ram the iron gates with their car. They would have cried hot, angry tears in front of the line of Bentleys and Porsches waiting behind them, giving the wealthy onlookers exactly the show they expected from the rejected black sheep of the family. But I was not most people. I was a forensic accountant. I made a living out of staying calm while destroying people with paper trails. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive leather and impending chaos. I reached over to the passenger seat. There it sat, a small square box wrapped in crushed black velvet and tied with a blood-red satin ribbon. To the untrained eye, it looked like a jewelry box, perhaps containing a diamond tennis bracelet or a pair of sapphire earrings. A peace offering from a desperate sister trying to buy her way back into the family fold. I ran my fingers over the soft fabric. It felt heavy. Not heavy with gold, but heavy with consequences. Inside this box was not a gift. It was an execution order. I rolled down the window completely. The security guard tensed up. He took a half step back, his hand hovering near his belt, as if he expected me to pull a weapon. In a way, I was. I picked up the box and held it out to him. Underneath the box, I slid a crisp $100 bill folded neatly. The guard looked at the money, then at my face. His aggression melted away, replaced by confusion and greed. Please ensure the bride receives this immediately, I said, my voice smooth as glass and cold as ice. Tell her it is a wedding gift from her sister. Tell her it contains the key to the truth she has been missing. The guard hesitated for a second, then reached out and took the box and the cash. He weighed the box in his hand, surprised by its density. Tell her she needs to open it before the ceremony, I added, lowering my sunglasses to look him directly in the eyes. It is a family tradition. It would be bad luck to walk down the aisle without seeing it. He nodded slowly, tucking the money into his pocket. I will put it on the gift table right inside the main door, ma'am. I will make sure she gets the message. Thank you, I said. I put the convertible into reverse. I did not look back at the grand estate. I did not glance at the judgment on the faces of the guests in the car behind me. I simply turned the wheel and navigated the car away from the venue. As I accelerated down the tree-lined driveway, a sense of calm washed over me. I had done my part. I had delivered the payload. In my rearview mirror, I saw the guard walking back toward the booth, placing the black velvet box on the ledge. It sat there dark and ominous against the white stucco of the gatehouse. It absorbed the sunlight. It looked small and insignificant, but I knew better. That box was a ticking time bomb, and the countdown had just begun. They wanted me gone, so I left. But I left them something that would make them wish they had begged me to stay. I merged onto the main road and turned up the radio. I had a spa appointment to get to, and my sister had a life to ruin. 20 minutes later, I walked into the lobby of the St. Regis Spa. The air smelled of white tea and money. It was the kind of silence that cost $500 an hour to experience. A stark contrast to the humidity and high-pitched hysteria I knew was currently unfolding at the estate gates. I checked in at the front desk. The receptionist greeted me with a warm, genuine smile. She offered me cucumber water and asked if I wanted the deep tissue or the Swedish massage. I chose deep tissue. I had a lot of knots in my shoulders from carrying the weight of my family's financial secrets for the last decade. I changed into a plush white robe and slippers, leaving my emerald dress in the locker. In the treatment room, the lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow. Soft instrumental music played in the background, designed to lower a person's heart rate. I lay down on the table, but I did not close my eyes immediately. I reached out and placed my iPhone on the small marble side table directly across from my face. I did not turn it off. I did not put it in airplane mode. I simply flipped the switch to silent. I wanted to see it. I needed the visual confirmation that the grenade I tossed had finally detonated. The therapist began working on my upper back, kneading away the tension. For the first 10 minutes, the phone sat there dark and lifeless. A black mirror reflecting the candle flame. I breathed in the eucalyptus steam and counted backward from 100. I knew the logistics. It would take the guard 5 minutes to walk to the main house. Another 5 minutes to find Tiana in the bridal suite. Maybe 10 minutes for her to stop admiring herself in the mirror long enough to open the box. Then it happened. The screen lit up. A single silent flash in the semi-darkness. The name Tiana appeared in bold letters. It glowed for 30 seconds, then went dark. I did not move. I did not reach for it. I just watched. 5 seconds later, it lit up again. Tiana. Then again. Tiana. The intervals between the flashes grew shorter. The urgency was palpable even without sound. It was a strobe light of desperation. Then the names started changing. Mom. Dad. Mom again. Tiana. A number I did not recognize, which I assumed was Braden. The phone was vibrating against the marble surface, now a low hum that harmonized with the spa music. It was relentless. I closed my eyes and let the therapist dig her elbow into my shoulder blade. In my mind, I could see the scene perfectly. I visualized Tiana standing in her overpriced lace gown, holding the warrant for Braden's arrest. I imagined the color draining from my mother's face as she read the foreclosure notice on the house she claimed to own. I pictured my father trying to spin a lie and failing because the numbers in that box were black and white facts. The screen kept pulsing. 1 missed call, 5 missed calls, 12, 20. The notifications stacked up on the lock screen like a chaotic game of Tetris. Text messages started flooding in, causing the light to flicker rapidly. I could read the previews without picking it up. Call me now. You are lying. Pick up the phone, Keisha. Where did you get this? We are ruining everything. By the time the hour-long session was over, the battery had drained by 15% just from the sheer volume of incoming data. The therapist told me to take my time getting up. I sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped the robe tighter around me. I reached for the phone. 53 missed calls. 80 text messages. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was the most peaceful silence I had ever known. They were screaming into the void, and for the first time in my life, I was not there to listen. I took a sip of water and swiped the notifications away. I was not ready to speak to them yet. I wanted them to sit in the mess they made a little longer. I sat on the velvet bench in the private dressing area and reached for my noise-canceling earbuds. I wanted to hear every nuance of the destruction I had caused. I wanted to experience the timeline of their downfall in high-definition audio. I pressed play on the first voicemail. It was time-stamped exactly 20 minutes after I drove away from the gate. Tiana's voice blasted through the speakers loud and dripping with arrogance. Keisha the guard just gave me your little box. I hope it is actual jewelry and not some sentimental trash, because frankly, we do not need more clutter. Brayden says we should just throw it in the trash, but Mom wants to open it to see if there is cash inside. You really are pathetic, trying to buy your way back into our good graces after we kicked you out. Call me back so I can tell you where to send the apology flowers. I took a slow sip of my cucumber water. The arrogance was so thick it was almost sweet. I swiped to the next message recorded only 10 minutes later. The tone had shifted completely. The background noise was quieter, as if she had stepped into a bathroom or a closet to hide. Keisha, what is this? I opened the box. Why is there a police report in here with Brayden's face on it? Why is there a foreclosure notice for Mom and Dad's house? This is not funny. If this is some kind of sick Photoshop prank, I will sue you for emotional distress. You are trying to scare me, but it will not work. Call me back right now and explain this garbage before I have security ban you from the state. I could hear the tremor in her voice. The cracks were starting to form in her perfect porcelain reality. I skipped 2 more messages of her demanding I pick up and went straight to the one time-stamped 15 minutes ago. This was where the panic set in. Tiana sounded breathless, like she was hyperventilating. I could hear my mother screaming in the background, something about calling her lawyer. Keisha, pick up the phone. Dad is saying the numbers on these bank statements are wrong, but the bank logo looks real. Brayden is acting weird. He will not look at the papers. He is trying to leave the dressing room. He says he has to make an urgent call to his investors, but he looks terrified. What did you do? What are these documents, Keisha? You need to tell me this is fake. Please tell me this is fake. I let out a soft breath. It was the sound of a plan executing perfectly. I pressed play on the final message. It had come in just as I was walking out of the massage room. It started with static, and then a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was not a word. It was a scream. A raw, guttural sound of pure devastation that tore through the speaker. Then came the sobbing. Uncontrollable, ugly sobbing. They are here, Keisha. The police are here. They just walked into the bridal suite. They are putting handcuffs on Brayden. They say he is wanted for wire fraud and identity theft. Mom just fainted. Everyone is watching. The guests are filming it on their phones. Why did you do this to me? You ruined my life. You ruined everything. The message ended with a sharp click. I took the earbuds out and placed them neatly in my purse. The silence in the locker room felt heavy, but to me it felt like justice. I looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. My skin looked glowing from the facial. My eyes were bright and clear. I did not see a villain. I saw a woman who had finally balanced the ledger. A small smile played on my lips. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the executioner who had just pulled the lever and watched the blade drop. I stood up and smoothed my robe. It was time to go home and watch the news. To understand why I felt zero guilt watching my family burn, we have to go back 6 months to the night Brayden Miller walked into our lives. The memory is tinted in sepia in my mind, like a bad movie about the decline of the American empire. My parents had insisted on hosting a welcome dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in Buckhead. They could not afford it, of course. I knew for a fact that my father had taken out a payday loan just to cover the deposit on the private room. But appearances were everything to the Vances, and they were determined to sell the illusion of wealth to their future son-in-law. When Brayden arrived, he looked like he had stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. He wore a navy Italian suit that fit too perfectly, and a gold watch that caught the light with every gesture. I remember thinking it looked too shiny, almost desperate in its brilliance, but my parents were blinded by the glare. My father, Marcus, a man who demanded absolute submission from me, practically bowed as he shook Brayden's hand. My mother, Patricia, looked at him with a hunger that had nothing to do with the food. She saw a retirement plan. She saw a ticket back to the high society circles that had rejected her years ago. The seating arrangement told you everything you needed to know about the family hierarchy. Tiana and Brayden were seated at the head of the table like a king and queen holding court. My parents flanked them, leaning in close, hanging on every word Brayden said. And then there was me. I was placed at the far end of the table in a chair that wobbled slightly, positioned directly next to the service entrance. Every time a waiter walked in the door hit the back of my chair. It was a subtle message. You are here to fill a seat, not to participate. For the first hour I was invisible. I sipped my water and watched the performance. Brayden dominated the conversation with buzzwords that sounded impressive to the ignorant. He talked about offshore liquidity and crypto volatility and high-yield venture capital. My father nodded along, pretending to understand, asking questions that made no sense. Oh yes, the market is very bullish. Indeed, Dad said, sweating slightly in his tight collar. Then the conversation turned to careers. Brayden looked down the table at me for the first time all night. Tiana tells me you work with numbers, Keisha. What are you, a bank teller? The table erupted in laughter. It was a mean, sharp sound. Tiana squeezed Brayden's arm, delighting in the mockery. Actually, I am a forensic accountant, I said, keeping my voice level. I audit large corporations and individuals for financial fraud. I find money that people try to hide. The laughter died instantly. For a second, a shadow passed over Brayden's face. A flicker of genuine fear that he masked quickly with a sip of vintage Cabernet. My mother jumped in to salvage the mood. Oh, ignore her, Brayden. She just pushes papers around. Tiana is the real star. She is going to be a philanthropist once you two take over the world. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. The bottle of wine on the table was empty. My mother snapped her fingers at me. Keisha, stop staring and pour Brayden some more wine. The waiter is busy. Be useful for once. I sat there frozen. She was treating me like the help in front of a stranger. I looked at my father, hoping for defense, but he just looked away. I looked at Tiana and she smirked, raising her empty glass too. Slowly I stood up. I walked over and poured the wine. I played the part of the servant. But as I watched the dark red liquid fill Brayden's glass, I made a silent vow. Enjoy it now, because I am going to make sure this is the last expensive meal you ever eat. I sat back down in my wobbling chair and smiled. I had seen the fear in Brayden's eyes when I mentioned fraud. And I knew exactly where to start digging. The arrival of the main course did nothing to silence my mother, Patricia. If anything, the sight of the 40-ounce tomahawk steak arriving at the table only seemed to fuel her need to establish the family hierarchy. She cut into her filet mignon with delicate precision and looked directly at Brayden. Her eyes were sparkling not with maternal pride, but with the calculation of a woman who believed she had finally won the lottery. You know, Brayden, we always knew Tiana was destined for a life like yours, Patricia said, gesturing with her fork. Even as a child, she had such refined taste. She refused to wear anything but silk and cashmere. She just has an instinct for quality. She looked over at me and her expression curdled into a mask of pity. Unlike Keisha. Keisha has always been so utilitarian. I kept chewing my asparagus, forcing myself to swallow the insult along with the food. Utilitarian. It was her polite way of calling me boring and cheap. Keisha is our worker bee, my mother continued, taking a sip of wine. She loves her little spreadsheets and her rules. It is good, honest work, I suppose, but it lacks imagination. Tiana is an artist. Her medium is lifestyle. She brings beauty into a room. Keisha just brings a calculator. Tiana giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Oh, stop it, Mom. You make Keisha sound like a robot, although she does dress like one. No offense, sis, but that blazer makes you look like a high school principal. Brayden laughed, a deep baritone sound that was practiced and hollow. He leaned back in his leather chair, expanding his chest like a peacock. Well, I appreciate beauty. That is why I chose Tiana. But I also appreciate numbers when they are big enough. In my line of work, we do not deal in small change. We deal in legacy wealth. My father Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on the white tablecloth. Tell us more about this new fund you mentioned, Braden. The Helios Growth Fund, right? Braden nodded, swirling his wine. It is an exclusive vehicle, Marcus. We use algorithmic trading based on geopolitical shifts. It is too complex to explain to the layman, but we are seeing returns of 20% a month. Conservative estimates, of course. My internal auditor alarm bells started ringing so loud I thought my head would explode. 20% a month was not investing. It was a Ponzi scheme. It was mathematically impossible for a legitimate fund to sustain those numbers without high-risk leverage or fraud. I looked at my parents. I expected them to be skeptical. I expected my father, who had worked in insurance for 30 years, to ask about the risk factors. Instead, I saw pure, unadulterated greed. My father's eyes were wide and glossy. He was not hearing the warning signs. He was mentally spending money he did not have. That sounds incredible, son. My father said, his voice trembling with admiration. You are operating on a level most people only dream of. I could not help myself. The professional in me overrode the obedient daughter. Who is your underwriter? I asked quietly. And who audits your quarterly reports? The table went dead silent. Braden's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before recovering. My mother kicked me hard under the table. Her heel dug into my shin bone, but I did not flinch. Don't be rude, Keisha, my mother hissed. Just because you spend your days hunting for pennies does not mean you understand high finance. Let the men talk. Eat your dinner and try not to ruin the opportunity of a lifetime with your petty jealousy. I looked at Braden. He winked at me. It was a challenge. He knew my parents were already sold. He knew he had won. But he forgot one thing. He was sitting across from the only person in the room who knew how to track a lie back to its source. I picked up my knife and cut into my steak. I decided right then that I would not just audit his quarterly reports. I would audit his entire existence. To understand why I became a forensic accountant, you have to understand the moment I realized that love in my family was just a transaction, and I was on the losing end. I was 18 years old and packed for college. I had worked double shifts at a diner to save enough for my first semester deposit at Howard University. I was ready to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the Vance household. I had applied for a modest student apartment off campus. It was a tiny studio with a leaky faucet, but to me it looked like a palace of freedom. Then the letter came. It was not a thick acceptance packet. It was a thin, single sheet of paper from the leasing office. Application denied. Reason: excessive debt to income ratio and severe delinquency. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. I did not have debt. I did not even have a credit card. I drove to the leasing office in a panic, thinking it was a clerical error. The leasing agent, a kind woman with pity in her eyes, turned her computer screen toward me. Honey, you have a $50,000 auto loan that has not been paid in 3 months, she said gently. It is in collections. Your credit score is 420. You could not rent a bicycle with this, let alone an apartment. I looked at the vehicle description on the screen. A brand new Cadillac Escalade, pearl white. The exact same car my parents had driven home 2 months ago, beaming with pride. They had told me my father got a bonus. They told me it was a reward for his hard work. I drove home so fast my hands shook on the steering wheel of my beat-up Honda Civic. When I burst into the kitchen, my mother was making a smoothie, and Tiana was practicing her pageant walk in the living room. I slammed the rejection letter on the granite island. You stole my identity, I screamed. My voice cracked. I was not the calm, collected woman I am today. I was a terrified teenager watching her future dissolve. You used my social security number to buy that truck. My father walked in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. He did not look shocked. He looked annoyed. Keep your voice down, Keisha, he snapped. Tiana is focusing. You ruined my credit, I yelled. I cannot get an apartment. I cannot get a student loan. Why would you do this? My mother sighed, setting down the blender. She looked at me like I was being unreasonable. We had to, Keisha. Our credit is fully utilized right now, and we needed a reliable vehicle. Tiana has traveling dance competitions all over the state. We cannot pull up to regionals in an old sedan. It reflects poorly on her brand. Her brand. Tiana was 12 years old. She did not have a brand, she had a hobby. So you destroyed my life so she could look rich, I whispered. Oh, stop being dramatic, my mother said, waving her hand. We will pay it off eventually. It is just a number on a computer screen, Keisha. Family helps family. You should be proud that you could contribute to your sister's success. Besides, you can just commute to college from home. It saves money anyway. That was the moment something inside me broke. They did not see me as a person with dreams. They saw me as a resource to be harvested to feed Tiana's ego. I looked at my father, expecting him to be the voice of reason. He just shrugged and opened a beer. You are making a mountain out of a molehill, he said. I walked out of that kitchen and I never really went back. That night I started reading everything I could find about credit law. I learned about fraud alerts and police reports. I did not report them then because I was young and afraid, but I made a vow. I would never let anyone control my financial destiny again. I would become the person who catches the liars. And one day I would make them pay for that Cadillac. I left the house that night with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of cold determination. My mother did not try to stop me. She was too busy helping Tiana coordinate her outfits for the next pageant. I slept in my Honda Civic for 3 weeks, parking in well-lit Walmart lots and showering at the local gym. It was humiliating, but it was also the first time in my life I felt truly free. I was hungry and tired, but at least I was not being used. I took every shift I could get. By day, I scrubbed floors in office buildings where people looked right through me like I was part of the furniture. By evening, I waited tables at a diner serving pancakes to happy families that made my chest ache with envy. By night, I worked the graveyard shift at a call center, listening to people scream about their internet service. I lived on instant noodles and stale coffee. My hands were dry and cracked from cleaning chemicals, and my feet bled from cheap shoes, but I never called home. Not once. I enrolled in community college, paying my tuition in cash because my credit was too ruined for loans. I sat in the front row of Introduction to Accounting and fell in love. Not with the math, but with the logic. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not gaslight you. Numbers did not steal your identity to buy a Cadillac. I transferred to the university and specialized in forensic accounting. My professors thought I was just diligent. They did not know I was training for war. I studied fraud schemes like other people studied scripture. I learned how people hid assets, how they cooked books, and how they used shell companies to mask their greed. I learned to spot the tiny discrepancies that unraveled million-dollar lies. Every time my eyes drooped at 3 in the morning in the university library, I thought of that white Escalade sitting in my parents' driveway. It became my fuel. I realized that money leaves a trail no matter how smart the thief thinks they are. I graduated at the top of my class, not because I was the smartest, but because I was the hungriest. I swore an oath to myself the day I walked across that stage. I would never be a victim again. I would never let anyone sign my name or spend my money or leverage my existence for their gain. I became a hunter of financial predators. I spent the next decade taking down embezzlers and con artists. I did not know it then, but I was sharpening the very knife I would eventually use to cut the cancer of my family out of my life. When I finally landed my job at the top firm in Atlanta and bought my first suit with my own money, I knew I was ready. I was not the little girl they could bully anymore. I was the auditor, and everyone eventually gets audited. 10 years later, I was not the girl sleeping in a Honda Civic anymore. I was a senior partner at one of the most prestigious forensic accounting firms in Atlanta. I wore tailored suits and drove the Mercedes that the security guard would eventually turn away. But no matter how high I climbed on the corporate ladder, I was still just a child seeking approval when I walked through my parents' front door. They had summoned me on a rainy Tuesday evening. The air in the house was stale, smelling of old dust and new desperation. My father sat at the head of the dining table, his silhouette looming large against the dim light. My mother stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder, presenting a united front of intimidation. They did not offer me a drink. They did not ask about my recent promotion. They just slid a foreclosure notice across the mahogany table. "We are temporarily illiquid," Marcus said, clearing his throat. "The market has been unkind to my investments. The bank is being unreasonable, threatening to take the family home over a few missed payments." I picked up the paper. A few missed payments was an understatement. They had not paid the mortgage in 14 months. They were drowning. "We have a solution," my mother added, her voice sharp and commanding. "Since you are doing so well now, Keisha, we have decided to let you invest in the property. You will buy out the mortgage and put the deed in your name. We will continue to live here, of course, to maintain the property for you. It is a great opportunity for you to own real estate in this zip code." I almost laughed. They were framing their bankruptcy as a favor to me. They were asking me to save them, but they spoke like they were bestowing a knighthood. "And if I say no?" I asked, looking up at them. My father slammed his hand on the table, causing the china to rattle. "Then you are ungrateful. We put a roof over your head. We raised you. We sacrificed everything so you could have that fancy education. Now that you are rich, you think you are better than us. You think you can just watch your parents end up on the street." The guilt trip was immediate and practiced. They knew exactly which buttons to push. They weaponized my childhood trauma against me. They knew I was desperate to prove I was good enough. I looked at their faces, hard and unyielding. They were not asking for help, they were demanding tribute. "Fine," I said, my voice quiet. "I will buy the house. But I own it. You are just tenants." My mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Details, Keisha. The point is the house stays in the family. Just wire the money by Friday." I signed the papers. I paid off their debt. I saved them from humiliation. And how did they thank me? They told the neighbors that I had bought the house as a thank you gift for being such wonderful parents. They told everyone I was finally paying them back for raising me. They lived in my house rent-free and treated me like a landlord they could not wait to evict. But I kept the deed in a safe deposit box. I knew that one day, that piece of paper would be the only shield I had left. Living in that house became a daily lesson in the psychology of entitlement. My sister Tiana did not view money as a finite resource earned through labor. She viewed it as a natural phenomenon, like rain or sunshine, that simply existed to nourish her lifestyle. One Saturday afternoon perfectly encapsulated the madness that had overtaken my family. I was sitting at the kitchen island, surrounded by a mountain of bills: the property tax, the insurance, the electricity bill, which was astronomically high because Tiana refused to turn off lights in rooms she was not using. I was writing a check for $3,000 to the county tax collector, my hand cramping slightly from the sheer volume of paperwork. Across from me, Tiana was draped over the velvet sofa, scrolling through Instagram. Her long acrylic nails made a rhythmic clicking sound against her phone screen. She did not look up when she spoke. She just tossed the demand into the air, like a queen ordering a servant to fetch wine. "Keisha, I need you to transfer $5,000 to my account by tonight. I have a deposit due for the trip to Tulum." I stopped writing. The pen hovered over the signature line. I looked at her. She was wearing a silk robe that I had paid for drinking a green juice that I had bought. "Tulum," I repeated, my voice flat. "You just got back from Miami last week, Tiana, and I am not transferring you $5,000. I am currently paying the taxes on the roof over your head. If you want to go to Mexico, get a job and pay for it." Tiana finally looked up. She lowered her phone and stared at me with genuine confusion. It was not anger yet. It was bafflement. As if I had started speaking a foreign language. "I have a job, Keisha," she said, rolling her eyes. "I am building my personal brand. This trip is for content. I cannot take photos for the gram in this dusty living room. I need an ocean backdrop. Besides, why are you being so stingy? You make plenty of money. What else are you going to spend it on? Your blazers, your books. You are boring, Keisha. You exist to work. I exist to live. It is a perfect ecosystem if you just stop fighting it. I felt a vein throb in my temple. She truly believed that. She believed my purpose on this earth was to be the fuel for her engine. She thought she was doing me a favor by spending the money I earned because in her twisted logic, she was the only one who knew how to enjoy it properly. I am not an ecosystem, Tiana, I said, closing the checkbook with a snap. I am your landlord, and frankly, you are a terrible tenant. She laughed, a light, airy sound that dismissed my entire existence. You are so dramatic when you are stressed. Just send the money. Mom said you would cover it. She knows how important this exposure is for my engagement metrics. I looked at her, at the absolute void behind her pretty eyes, and I realized something terrifying. She was never going to grow up. She was never going to wake up one day and realize she was a leech. She was 26 years old, and she still thought the world owed her a living simply because she was beautiful. I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving the bills on the counter. I did not send the money for Tulum. My mother ended up selling her grandmother's vintage jewelry to pay for it. When Tiana posted the photos from the beach captioned self-made, she tagged everyone except me. But I didn't care. I was already planning my exit strategy. 3 months before the chaos at the gate, we sat down for what my mother called a logistical strategy meeting. The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of expensive lilies that Tiana had ordered using my credit card on file at the florist. She dropped a white leather binder onto the table with a heavy thud. It was embossed with gold letters that read, "The Merger of the Century." This is the vision, Tiana announced, opening the binder to reveal mood boards filled with castles, imported orchids, and a 10-tier cake. We are going for modern royalty meets old money. Braden says we need to project absolute abundance to reassure his investors. My father Marcus nodded solemnly as if they were discussing a peace treaty rather than a party. The optics are crucial, Keisha. This is not just a wedding. It is a networking event for the family. It is where we solidify our status. I took a sip of coffee and cut to the chase. How much is this going to cost? My mother Patricia exchanged a look with Tiana, a look that I now recognize as the co-conspirator's glance. Well, quality comes at a price. We have crunched the numbers, and to do this properly, we are looking at a budget of $500,000. I choked on my coffee. $500,000 for a 6-hour party. I looked at my father, expecting him to be the voice of fiscal sanity. He was unemployed and living in a house I owned. Surely he would shut this down. Instead, he leaned forward and clasped his hands. Obviously, we do not have that kind of liquidity right now given the market downturn, but we know you do. I froze. Excuse me. We have divided the costs, my mother interjected, smoothly sliding a spreadsheet across the table. Braden is covering the honeymoon and the rings. We need you to cover the venue, the catering, and the decor. It comes out to roughly $250,000. We will handle the small stuff like the dress and the invitations. I stared at them, my eyes widening until they burned. You want me to pay $250,000 for a wedding I am barely invited to? It is not a gift, Keisha. It is a duty. Tiana snapped, flipping her hair. You are the older sister. You are single. You have no children and no expenses. You sit on that pile of money doing nothing while I am out here trying to elevate the family name. It is the least you can do after all the sacrifices we made for you. I slammed my hand on the table. Sacrifices. I pay the mortgage on this house. I paid for your car insurance last month. I paid for the groceries in this fridge. And you throw that in our faces every chance you get, my mother yelled, standing up. You are so transactional, Keisha. This is your sister's big day. Braden is going to be a billionaire. Think of this as an investment. When they make it big, they will take care of us. They will take care of you. You are buying equity in their future. I looked at the three of them. The delusion was absolute. They truly believed that my hard-earned money was simply a holding tank for their desires. I am not giving you a dime, I said, standing up. My father's face turned purple. If you do not help this family, you are no daughter of mine. Fine, I said, walking to the door. Then ask your billionaire son-in-law to pay for it. That was the last time we spoke civilly. I did not know then that my refusal would trigger a chain reaction of fraud that would end with handcuffs. But looking back at that moment, I realized that was when they decided I was no longer an asset, but an obstacle to be removed. 1 week later, the tension in the house was so thick you could choke on it. I walked into the kitchen to find my parents sitting at the small, round breakfast table. They were not eating. They were waiting. My father Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, Keisha," he said. His voice was too calm. It was the calm of a predator before the strike. I sat down, keeping my posture rigid. In front of him lay a thick stack of papers clipped together. He slid them across the glass surface until they rested under my hands. "We found a solution for the wedding budget," he said. "We secured a private loan. The terms are aggressive, but Braden assures us his next dividend payout will cover the principal within 60 days. We just need a co-signer." I looked down at the document. It was not a standard bank loan. It was from a private hard money lender, the kind that operates in the gray areas of the law. The interest rate was 25%. The penalty clauses were draconian. I flipped to the signature page. My name was already typed out under the line labeled guarantor. "You want me to co-signer this?" I asked, looking up. My mother Patricia reached out and touched my hand. Her skin felt cold and clammy. "Just for a few weeks, sweetie. Our credit score is temporarily impacted because of the market volatility. Your credit is perfect. It is just a signature. It is just ink on paper." I pulled my hand away as if she had burned me. "It is not just ink, Mom. It is full legal liability. If Braden does not pay, which I guarantee he will not, I am on the hook for $250,000 plus interest. This loan could bankrupt me." My father's face darkened. The veins in his neck began to bulge. He slammed his fist on the table, making the coffee cups jump and spill brown liquid onto the white tablecloth. "Why are you always so negative? You always assume the worst of people. Braden is a financial genius. He is going to be family. Do you not trust your own father's judgment?" I stood up, pushing the chair back. The room felt like it was spinning. I felt trapped in a circle of madness. "I am not signing it. Dad," I said, my voice shaking, but firm. "I am not putting my financial future in the hands of a man who cannot even get a loan in his own name." My mother burst into tears. It was a theatrical performance worthy of an Oscar. She buried her face in her hands and wailed. "You are so selfish. You want your sister to be humiliated. You want everyone to know we are struggling. You hate us. You have always hated us because Tiana is the favorite." The words hung in the air. She had finally said it out loud. The admission that I had known since I was 5 years old, but never heard confirmed. I looked at them. My father red-faced and furious. My mother sobbing dry, manipulative tears. They looked like strangers to me. "I am not selfish," I said, looking my father in the eye. "I am smart, and I am not setting myself on fire just to keep you warm." "Get out of my sight!" my father screamed, pointing at the door. "If you walk away now, do not expect to be part of this family when we are rich. You will be nothing to us." I walked out of the kitchen while my father hurled insults at my back. I went to my room and locked the door. I did not cry. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my professional database. If they were willing to destroy me for a predatory loan, I needed to find out exactly why they were so desperate. That was the night the investigation truly began. The devil is always in the details. That is the first rule of forensic accounting. You do not look at the big picture because that is where the lie is painted. You look at the small cracks in the frame. For me, the crack was on Braden's left wrist. We were at a brunch my parents insisted on to smooth things over after I refused to sign the loan. They sat there smiling, desperate to pretend we were one big, happy, solvent family. Braden was holding court, gesturing wildly as he talked about his liquidity and his connections in the Cayman Islands. But I was not listening to his voice. I was focused entirely on his timepiece. It was a Rolex Daytona, gold with a green dial. To the untrained eye like my father's, it was a $40,000 symbol of absolute power. But I had spent 3 years auditing luxury asset forfeitures for the FBI. I knew watches. A genuine Rolex movement is smooth. The second hand sweeps in a perfect continuous fluid motion. It glides. But as I watched Braden's hand rest on the white tablecloth, I saw it. The stutter. Tick, tick, tick. It was microscopic. A fraction of a second hesitation between movements. It was a high-quality replica, probably purchased on Canal Street for $300 or ordered from a shady website in Shenzhen. I felt a cold smile spreading internally. If his watch was a lie, what else was counterfeit? The second red flag came 10 minutes later when the bill arrived. It was a significant amount, nearly $400 for mimosas and seafood towers. My father naturally reached for his wallet, but stopped, remembering his cards were maxed out. He looked at Braden with that pathetic, hopeful expression that made my stomach turn. Braden laughed loudly, a sound that was too big for the room, and grabbed the check. "It is on me, Marcus," he said, slapping my father on the back. I watched his hands closely. I expected him to pull out a black card, an Amex Centurion, or at least a Platinum. The kind of card a man managing a $100 million fund would carry to collect the points. Instead, he opened his wallet, and I saw a flash of empty leather slots. No metal cards, no corporate expense accounts. He pulled out a thick wad of cash. Dirty, wrinkled bills. 50s and 20s wrapped in a rubber band. Who carries $500 in small bills to a country club brunch? Drug dealers and people hiding from the IRS. He peeled off the cash and threw it on the table with a flourish. Keeping it liquid, he joked, looking at me. "The banks are tracking everything these days, right, Keisha? You know how it is." He winked at me. He thought he was being charming. He thought the cash made him look like a baller. But I knew better. Wealthy men use leverage. They do not carry rolls of cash like a boardwalk bookie unless they have no credit to speak of. He was not avoiding credit cards because of privacy. He was avoiding them because he did not have any. Or worse, because swiping one would trigger an immediate decline. I sipped my iced tea and watched the fake Rolex tick on his wrist. I realized then that my parents were not just banking on a liar. They were banking on a ghost. The week following the brunch, I found myself walking down the hallway of my own house late at night. I had come downstairs to get a glass of water, but the sound of voices drifting from the study stopped me in my tracks. The heavy oak door was cracked open just an inch, releasing a sliver of golden light that cut across the dark floorboards. I knew I should keep walking. I knew that eavesdropping was beneath me. But the tone of my father's voice, low and conspiratorial, pulled me toward the shadows like a magnet. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing shallowly to remain undetected. Inside the room, my parents were entertaining Braden with a glass of brandy. I could not see them, but I could hear the clink of crystal and the distinct rustle of hesitation in the air. "So Marcus," Braden said, his voice smooth but edged with an underlying hunger. "We are getting close to the wedding date, and my financial advisors are asking about the family portfolio. They just want to ensure that Tiana is coming into the marriage with the stability we discussed. You know how it is with these high-level mergers. We need to match assets." I held my breath. My parents had no assets. They had debt. They had a leased BMW and a mortgage I was secretly paying. I expected my father to stutter or make an excuse about liquidity. Instead, I heard Marcus laugh. It was a confident, booming sound that made my skin crawl. "Do not worry about stability, son. The Vance family is built on solid ground. Aside from this house, which is currently valued at $800,000, we hold significant real estate across the city." I frowned in the darkness. This house was in my name. "We have a luxury condo in Midtown and a duplex near the university." My mother added, her voice dripping with sugary deception. They generate excellent passive income. We just keep them in a private trust for tax purposes, so you won't see our names directly on the public deeds. But make no mistake, they are ours, and one day they will all belong to Tiana. My jaw dropped. The condo in Midtown. The duplex. Those were my properties. I had bought them with my bonuses. I had renovated them with my own hands. I had set up the LLCs to protect them. My parents had absolutely nothing to do with them other than the fact that I had once foolishly driven them past the buildings to show them my success. They were not just lying about their own wealth. They were stealing my achievements and wrapping them up as a dowry for my sister. "That is excellent news," Braden said, and I could hear the relief washing over him. The sound of a predator realizing the trap has bait in it. Real estate is king. I am glad to know Tiana is bringing real equity to the table. It makes the prenuptial agreement much simpler if we are both coming from abundance. Prenuptial agreement. I almost laughed out loud. He wanted to lock down assets that did not exist for them. My father poured another drink. Exactly. We are all on the same level here, Braden. We just want the best for our children. I stood there in the dark hallway clutching my empty water glass until my knuckles turned white. It was a masterclass in fraud. My parents were conning a con artist. They were selling him a bridge that I owned. They thought they were being clever, securing a rich husband for Tiana by inflating their net worth. But they had just handed me the ammunition I needed. Braden was only marrying Tiana because he thought she was an heiress to my real estate empire. If I took that away, if I proved that the Vance family fortune was actually just the Keisha Vance fortune, the wedding would not just be cancelled, it would be a crime scene. I turned around and walked silently back upstairs. I did not need water anymore. I was fueled by something much stronger. I walked into my home office and locked the door, turning the deadbolt with a satisfying click. It was time to stop being the sister and start being the auditor. I sat down in front of my 3 monitors and cracked my knuckles. The room was bathed in the cool blue glow of the screens as I woke up the system. I typed in my credentials for the National Financial Crimes Database, a tool that cost my firm $50,000 a year to access. I watched the green text scroll across the black background. It was the only language that made sense to me anymore. Input, process, output, truth. I started with the basics using the information I had memorized from the loan application my father had tried to force me to sign. Braden Miller, Social Security number, date of birth. I hit enter and waited. In my line of work, you expect to see a digital footprint, a mortgage, a car loan, a credit card history, even a speeding ticket from college. A person with wealth leaves a heavy footprint in the system because money requires management. But for Braden Miller, the screen remained stubbornly blank. The results that populated were terrifyingly empty. It was as if he had been born yesterday. I dug deeper, accessing the property records for the entire state of Georgia. Braden claimed to own a penthouse in Buckhead and a vacation home in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I ran the search query. 0 matches. I expanded the search to the entire southeast region. 0 matches. I expanded it to the entire United States. 0 matches. The man who claimed to manage generational wealth did not even own a parking space. Next, I went after his career, the Helios Growth Fund. He spoke about it like it was the next Bridgewater or BlackRock. I queried the Securities and Exchange Commission database for registered investment advisors. No record found. I checked the state business registry and finally got a hit. Helios Growth LLC. But it was not an investment bank. It was a domestic limited liability company registered just 4 months ago. The registered address was not a glass tower in the financial district. It was a mailbox at a UPS store in a strip mall next to a discount dry cleaner. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was not just a guy exaggerating his wealth to impress a girl. This was a professional fabrication. I pulled his credit report using the authorization clause from the unsigned loan document, which technically gave me permission to vet the primary borrower. The score that popped up was a single-digit error code. It meant the file was too thin to generate a score. He had no credit history, no credit cards, no student loans. Then I cross-referenced his phone number. It was a burner account paid for with prepaid debit cards bought at various gas stations around the city. I looked at the scrolling data streams reflecting in my glasses. The man eating my parents' food and drinking their wine was a ghost. He had no past. He had no assets. He had no footprint, which meant only one thing. Braden Miller was an alias, and I was about to find out who was really wearing the mask. I opened a new command window and prepared to run a facial recognition search against the mugshot database. If he was not in the financial system, maybe he was in the criminal one. I moved my search west toward the land of desperate men and quick fortunes, Nevada. If a man has no assets but spends cash like water, he is usually trying to fill a hole that cannot be filled. I accessed the Clark County Civil Court records. The system lagged for a moment, the spinning wheel on my screen mocking my impatience. Then it populated. A single hit that glowed against the dark interface like a warning flare. Case number CV 23904. Plaintiff Meridian Sands Resort and Casino. Defendant Braden Miller, also known as Brad Miller. Nature of suit, breach of contract, and unpaid markers. I clicked on the PDF file and downloaded the complaint. The document was 20 pages of legal destruction. As I scrolled through the legalese, the story became terrifyingly clear. Braden was not a hedge fund manager. He was a whale. But he was a whale that had beached himself. According to the affidavit, Braden had been granted a credit line of $2 million based on falsified bank statements he had provided to the casino host. He had gambled it all away in a 72-hour baccarat binge 3 months ago. The exact timeline matched the week before he met Tiana. The casino had tried to collect. The checks bounced. They were now suing him for the principal plus legal fees and interest totaling $2.1 million. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silence of my office. The blue light from the monitor cast long shadows across the room. It all made sense. The urgency of the wedding, the way he pushed for a quick ceremony, the way he obsessed over my parents' real estate holdings. He was not looking for a wife. He was looking for a bailout. I read further down the document. The casino had filed a motion for summary judgment, which meant they were about to garnish his wages and seize his assets. But he had no wages and no assets. He was facing jail time for writing bad checks in Las Vegas, which is a felony. He needed money, and he needed it yesterday. My parents' lie about owning my properties had painted a giant target on their backs. Braden believed Tiana was the heiress to a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. He thought that once they were married, he could leverage those properties to pay off the casino sharks before they broke his legs or threw him in prison. He was a drowning man grabbing onto an anchor thinking it was a life raft. I looked at his mugshot attached to the file. He looked tired. The charm was gone, leaving only the hollow eyes of an addict. He was dangerous, not because he was a violent mastermind, but because he was cornered. And my foolish, greedy family had invited this wolf right into their living room and offered him a seat at the head of the table. I saved the document to my encrypted drive. I had the motive. Now I just needed the final nail for the coffin. I needed to prove that the ring on Tiana's finger was just another piece of the con. With the gambling debt confirmed, I turned my attention to the rock on my sister's finger. Tiana had posted about 1,000 photos of her engagement ring. She claimed it was a 5-carat custom design from Tiffany. She tagged Tiffany in every post, hoping for a sponsorship that would never come. I pulled up the highest resolution image I could find. It was a close-up of her hand resting on Braden's steering wheel. I zoomed in until the pixels began to blur. It was a cushion-cut diamond with a very specific halo setting of pink sapphires. It was gaudy, it was loud, and it looked vaguely familiar. I took a screenshot and sent it to my old college roommate Julianne, who now worked as a senior appraiser for an insurance adjusting firm in New York. If anyone knew about high-value jewelry, it was Julianne. I typed a simple message. "Does this look familiar?" Call me. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Julianne did not say hello. She just said, "Tell me you are not in possession of the Kensington diamond." I felt a rush of adrenaline. The Kensington diamond. I remembered the headlines now. It was a high-profile divorce case in Palm Beach 2 years ago. The husband, a disgraced crypto developer, had vanished with half the marital assets, including a distinctive engagement ring valued at $300,000. "I am not holding it," I said, "but my sister is wearing it. She thinks it is brand new." Julianne let out a low whistle. "Keisha, that ring is hot. It was reported stolen and flagged in the National Jewelry Registry. The insurance company paid out the claim already. If your sister is wearing it, she is technically in possession of stolen property. The FBI has an open file on this." I looked at the photo of Tiana again. She looked so proud, so smug. She had no idea she was walking around with a felony on her ring finger. Braden had not bought that ring. He had likely swiped it from a previous victim, or bought it on the black market for pennies on the dollar, using his gambling winnings before he lost them. This was the final piece of the puzzle. He was not just a broke gambler. He was a thief. I thanked Julianne and hung up. I pulled up the police report for the Kensington theft and superimposed it over Tiana's Instagram post on my screen. The description matched perfectly: cushion cut, pink sapphire halo, platinum band. I saved the image. My sister wanted a rock that would make people talk. Well, she was about to get her wish. Everyone was going to be talking about it, especially the federal agents I was about to call. I now had enough evidence to bury Braden, not just financially but criminally. But I was not done yet. I still had to deal with the people who invited this monster into our lives, my parents. And I had a feeling their hands were just as dirty. The call that changed everything came at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my office reviewing a merger file when my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed the fraud department of my mortgage lender. I answered, expecting a routine verification for a large purchase or a travel alert. I was calm. I was professional. I had no idea that my own blood relatives had just committed a federal crime against me. "Ms. Vance, this is David from the risk assessment team at Sovereign Bank. We are calling to verify the wire transfer request for $100,000 from your new home equity line of credit. We just wanted to confirm the beneficiary details before we release the funds." I stopped typing. The office suddenly felt very cold. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it as if it were a foreign object. Then I put it back. "Excuse me, David. I think there is a mistake. I did not open a home equity line of credit, and I certainly did not authorize a wire transfer." There was a long silence on the other end. The sound of typing. Then David's voice returned, serious and clipped. "Ma'am, we have a signed and notarized application on file dated 3 days ago. The loan was approved against the equity in your primary residence. The funds were deposited yesterday, and the wire instruction was submitted this morning." "Send me the document," I said. My voice was so low it was almost a whisper. "Send it to me right now." 2 minutes later, an email pinged in my inbox. I opened the attachment. There it was. A loan application for $100,000, using my house, my address, and my social security number. I scrolled to the bottom of the page. The signature read Keisha Vance. But it was not my signature. The loops on the K were too wide. The slant was wrong. It was a clumsy imitation made by someone who had seen my handwriting 1,000 times but never bothered to learn the rhythm of it. It was my mother's handwriting. I felt a physical blow to my chest. They had done it. They had actually done it. They had forged my signature to mortgage the house I bought to save them. They had put my home at risk to get cash. I looked at the wire instruction form. The beneficiary was listed clearly: Helios Growth, LLC. I closed my eyes. They had stolen $100,000 of my equity to give to Braden. They were feeding the con artist with stolen meat. They believed his lie so completely that they were willing to commit a felony to invest in his fake fund. They thought they were being clever. They thought they would pay it back before I ever noticed with the millions Braden promised them. I looked down at the expensive Montblanc pen I was holding. It was a gift to myself when I made partner. I gripped it hard. My knuckles turned white. I squeezed until my hand shook with the force of my rage. With a sharp, violent crack, the resin barrel shattered. Ink exploded onto my hand, staining my skin black. It looked like blood. I did not wipe it off. I brought the phone back to my ear. David, cancel the wire. Freeze the account. And send me the affidavit for identity theft. I am pressing charges. Who is the suspect? He asked. I looked at the ink dripping from my fingers. My parents, I said. My parents are the suspects. The conference room at Sterling and Associates was cold enough to preserve meat. It was a glass box, suspended 40 floors above the city, fitting for the cold calculation I was about to perform. My lawyer Robert sat across from me at the long granite table. He was a man who had seen everything from corporate espionage to nasty divorces, but as he read through the file I had assembled, his face went pale. He flipped through the forged loan application, the forensic analysis of Braden's fake identity, and the affidavit regarding the stolen ring. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Keisha, he said, his voice grave. You understand what you are asking me to do. These are not just civil complaints. This is a criminal referral to the district attorney. If we file this regarding the forged signature on the home equity loan, your parents are looking at federal charges. Wire fraud carries a sentence of up to 20 years. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I know the sentencing guidelines, Robert. I deal with them every day. He leaned forward, trying to catch my eye. We are talking about your mother and father. I know they have treated you poorly, but prison is a bell you cannot unring. Once the FBI gets involved, there is no dropping the charges because you feel guilty later. Are you absolutely sure you want to send your parents to a federal penitentiary over money? I looked out the window at the sprawling city of Atlanta. I thought about the white Escalade they bought with my credit when I was 18. I thought about the nights I slept in my car while they slept in my house. I thought about the $100,000 they had just stolen from my equity to give to a man who would gamble it away in a heartbeat. They did not steal from a stranger, they stole from the daughter who had saved them. They did not hesitate, Robert, I said, turning back to face him. They did not pause to think about my future when they forged my name. They did not worry about me losing my home when they drained the equity. They made a choice to sacrifice me for Tiana's happiness. Now I am making a choice to sacrifice them for my justice. Robert sighed, realizing he could not talk me down. He opened his laptop. Okay. We will file the police report for the identity theft today. We will attach the evidence regarding Mr. Miller's fraud as supporting documentation for the conspiracy charge. When do you want them served? I smiled a cold, humorless smile. Saturday, at the wedding. Robert paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. That is ruthless, Keisha. It will be a public spectacle. That is the point, I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer. They love a show, Robert. They spent $500,000 to get an audience. I am just giving them a grand finale they will never forget. Prepare the papers. I want the process server to walk in right after the vows, or better yet, right before. I gave her one last off-ramp. That is what I told myself as I stood outside the powder room at the rehearsal dinner venue. Even after the forgery and the theft, there was a tiny microscopic part of me that remembered Tiana as the little girl who used to ask me to braid her hair. I decided to offer her the truth one last time before the rest of the world forced it upon her. When she walked out checking her lipstick in a compact mirror, she looked startlingly beautiful. It was a tragedy, really, that so much outer perfection masked such inner rot. I blocked her path, ensuring we were alone in the marble corridor. Tiana, we need to talk. Not about the flowers or the seating chart. About Braden. She sighed, rolling her eyes so hard I thought they might detach. Keisha, if this is about the loan, get over it. Mom told me you are being difficult. We will pay you back once the fund matures. Stop trying to make everything about money. It is tacky. I stepped closer, invading her personal space. Tiana listened to me very carefully. There is no fund. Braden is not a millionaire. He is a con artist with a gambling addiction, and the ring on your finger is stolen property. I have the documents in my car. I have police reports. I am trying to save you from a federal indictment. Cancel the wedding. We can figure this out, but you cannot marry him. I expected shock. I expected questions. Instead, I watched her face twist into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She laughed a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the tiled walls. You are sick, Keisha. You are actually sick. You cannot stand that I am winning. You cannot stand that a high-value man chose me while you sleep alone with your spreadsheets. You concocted this whole story because you are a bitter, jealous spinster who wants to ruin my moment. I am not lying, Tiana, I said, reaching for her arm. He is going to prison. Then she moved. It was fast. Her hand connected with my cheek with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side. For a moment the world went silent. I did not hear the music from the ballroom. I did not hear her breathing. Just a high-pitched ringing in my ears. Time seemed to slow down. I could feel the heat blooming on my skin where her ring had grazed me. The physical pain was sharp, but the emotional severance was absolute. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She did not look sorry. She looked empowered. She looked like she had been wanting to do that for years. Stay away from my husband, she hissed. If you try to ruin my happiness with your lies, I will destroy you. You are not my sister. You are just a jealous obstacle. She pushed past me, bumping my shoulder hard, and stormed down the hall toward the party. I stood there alone, touching my stinging cheek. The ringing in my ears faded, replaced by a cold, deadly clarity. That was it. The last thread of loyalty had just been severed. I had offered her a lifeboat, and she had slapped it away. Now she could drown with the rest of them. I turned and walked toward the exit. I had a court filing to finalize. I walked into the executive restroom and turned the lock with a sharp click. The silence was immediate and welcome. I leaned against the cool marble vanity and looked at myself in the expansive mirror. The red mark on my cheek where Tiana had slapped me was already fading, but the clarity it brought was permanent. For years I had told myself a comforting lie. I had convinced myself that Tiana was just a victim of our parents' toxic parenting. I believed she was a spoiled child who did not know any better. But looking into my own eyes, I finally accepted the ugly truth. Tiana was not a victim. She was a co-conspirator. She did not care if Braden was a fraud. She did not care if the money was stolen or borrowed or imaginary. She only cared about the optics. She cared about the title of wife and the envy of her friends. She was exactly like our mother Patricia. She would burn down the entire world just to be the queen of the ashes. I had tried to be the savior. I had tried to be the responsible older sister who pulled them back from the edge of the cliff. But you cannot save people who are determined to jump. I reached into my purse and pulled out my lipstick. My hand was steady. I reapplied the color, tracing the curve of my lips with surgical precision. I was done being the safety net. I was done being the wallet. I was done being the punching bag. If they wanted to play pretend with a criminal, then I would let them. In fact, I would ensure they had the grandest audience possible for their inevitable destruction. I straightened my silk blouse and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. I looked at the woman in the glass. She looked dangerous. She looked like someone who had just buried the last shred of her sentimentality. I realized in that moment that I was not going to stop the wedding. I was going to accelerate it. I would let them say their vows. I would let them sign the marriage license. I would let them legally bind themselves to each other's debts and crimes. My father wanted a rich son-in-law. My mother wanted a society wedding. Tiana wanted a diamond that made people stare. I would give them exactly what they wanted. And then I would hand them the bill. I checked my watch. I had work to do. I needed to organize the evidence not for a private intervention, but for a public execution. The time for warnings was over. The time for consequences had arrived. I smiled at my reflection one last time. It was a cold, terrifying smile. The kind of smile a wolf gives right before it tears out the throat of its prey. I unlocked the door and stepped back out into the hallway. I was no longer their daughter or their sister. I was their reckoning. The rhythmic whir of the laser printer was the only sound in the room. It spat out pages with a mechanical efficiency that matched my own heartbeat. I stood at my mahogany desk, which had been transformed from a workspace into a munitions factory. I was not just organizing paperwork. I was assembling an improvised explosive device made entirely of facts and figures. I treated each sheet of paper not as a document but as a volatile component that needed to be handled with extreme caution. I picked up the first stack, the appraisal for the stolen Kensington diamond. I placed it at the very top. It was the bait. Tiana would see the jewelry appraisal header and think it was an insurance document or a certificate of authenticity. It was the perfect lure to ensure she kept reading. I smoothed the paper down, ensuring the edges were perfectly aligned. Next came the criminal history, the mugshot from Nevada, the lawsuit from the Meridian Sands Casino for the $2 million gambling debt. I arranged them so that Braden's tired, desperate face would be the first thing she saw after the ring appraisal. I wanted the transition from greed to horror to be instantaneous. I used a red pen to circle the dates, proving that he was losing her future inheritance at the baccarat tables while she was trying on wedding dresses. The third layer was the financial forensic report on Helios Growth LLC. The proof that it was a shell company with zero assets. The proof that her husband-to-be was not a financier, but a phantom. I weighed the stack in my hand. It was light physically, but it carried the weight of a life sentence. Finally, I reached for the most damning piece of evidence. The bottom layer. The affidavit of identity theft regarding the home equity loan. The document that proved my parents had forged my signature to feed this monster. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking at my mother's shaky handwriting on the copy. But then I remembered the slap in the hallway. I remembered the years of neglect. I placed the document at the bottom of the stack. This was the foundation of their ruin. I took the black velvet box I had purchased earlier. It was designed to hold a heavy necklace, but today it would hold something much more valuable: the truth. I slid the folded stack of papers inside. It fit perfectly. The black velvet absorbed the light, making the white edges of the paper look stark and dangerous. I closed the lid with a soft snap. It sounded like the cocking of a gun. I reached for a spool of blood-red satin ribbon. I tied it around the box, weaving the fabric into a complex, intricate bow. I pulled the loops tight, ensuring they were symmetrical. To the outside observer, it looked like a gesture of love, a sisterly offering. But I knew better. It was a Trojan horse. I picked up a small card and wrote a single line in my best calligraphy: "The truth will set you free." I tucked the card under the ribbon. The package was ready. I stared at the black box sitting on my desk. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And it was time to deliver it. As the drone camera pans over the slate-gray roof of the Chateau Lumière, it looks like a fairy tale fortress. It sits isolated on 40 acres of manicured lawn, a monument to excess and privacy. To my sister Tiana, it was the ultimate status symbol. She had spent months bragging about how she secured the venue. She told everyone that she had pulled strings, called in favors from high society connections, and bypassed a 2-year waiting list to get in. She believed she was special. She believed the universe had bent to her will to give her this perfect stage. The reality was far more clinical. The Chateau Lumière was not owned by a French count or a faceless hospitality conglomerate. It was the primary asset of Vesper Holdings LLC. And Vesper Holdings was a subsidiary of a blind trust that I established 3 years ago. I did not just buy the house they lived in. I owned the ground they were standing on right now. I had orchestrated this location choice with the precision of a military strike. When Tiana started venue hunting, I had my property manager list the estate on a private luxury portal she frequented. I knew her algorithm. I knew she could not resist a deal that felt exclusive. I priced it just within their stretched budget and offered a one-time cancellation waiver. They took the bait immediately. My mother even called me to gloat, saying that Tiana had business acumen because she found such a prestigious location for a steal. Owning the venue gave me absolute control over the tactical environment. I knew every exit. I knew every security camera angle because I had installed them. I had the master code to the electronic gates. When the time came to close the trap, there would be no back doors left open. No service entrances for Braden to slip out of when he saw the blue lights flashing. I had built a golden cage, and they had walked right into it wearing tuxedos and gowns. It was the ultimate irony. They were currently sipping champagne in a ballroom funded by my hard work, celebrating a marriage built on fraud, while unknowingly paying rent to the very person they had cast aside. My father was probably standing by the fireplace right now, telling guests how he secured the estate. He had no idea that the deed in the county clerk's office bore the signature of the daughter he called a failure. I watched the live feed from the security cameras on my phone. They looked so small from this angle. Just little figures moving around on my game board, waiting for me to make the final move. Back inside the bridal suite, the atmosphere was electric, with the kind of high-pitched hysteria that only exists minutes before a wedding. Champagne corks popped with rhythmic regularity. The bridesmaids were busy fussing over the train of Tiana's dress, smoothing out invisible wrinkles and applying fresh layers of gloss to her lips. Tiana stood in the center of the room, basking in the adoration like a lizard on a warm rock. She checked her reflection for the 100th time, convinced that the universe was finally rotating around her axis. Then the door opened. The security guard stepped in, looking uncomfortable in the sea of pastel chiffon. He cleared his throat and held out the black velvet box. Tiana turned, her eyes lighting up with triumph. She recognized the weight and texture of a high-end gift immediately. She smirked at her maid of honor, a look that said, "I told you so." "See," she announced to the room, her voice shrill with satisfaction. "I knew she would cave. Keisha always folds eventually. She probably bought me something extravagant to apologize for her little tantrum." She took the box from the guard's hand. It was heavy, promisingly heavy. The bridesmaids gathered around, cooing and speculating. Is it a necklace? Is it a bracelet? Tiana savored the moment. She ran her fingers over the soft velvet, enjoying the tactile sensation of victory. She believed she had won the war of wills. She believed her sister had finally accepted her place as the financier of Tiana's dreams. Slowly, deliberately, Tiana pulled the end of the blood-red satin ribbon. It unraveled with a silken whisper, pooling onto the floor. She lifted the lid, expecting the blinding sparkle of diamonds or the cool gleam of platinum. She was ready to gasp. She was ready to perform gratitude. But there was no sparkle. There was no gold. There was only paper. A confused frown creased her forehead. She reached in and pulled out the stack of documents. The room went quiet, the bridesmaids sensing that the script had suddenly changed. Tiana stared at the top sheet. It was not a card. It was not a heartfelt note of apology. It was a standard government form printed on stark white paper. Her eyes scanned the bold black header. Superior Court of Clark County, Nevada. Warrant for arrest. The name below it was typed in capital letters. Braden Miller. She blinked, trying to make the words rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that fit her worldview. But the words remained stubborn and absolute. Felony wire fraud, grand larceny, flight risk. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a physical wipe. The confident smirk that had been plastered on her lips seconds ago vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. Her hands began to tremble, the paper shaking violently in her grip. She read the next line. Bail denied. The camera of her mind zoomed in on the mugshot stapled to the corner of the warrant. It was Braden, but not her Braden, not the suave investor in the Italian suit. This was a man with dark circles under his eyes and a desperate snarl. A criminal. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of denial. No, she whispered the word, barely escaping her throat. This is a joke. This has to be a joke. But as her pupils dilated, swallowing the hazel of her irises in a pool of black panic, she knew it was not a joke. She looked at the date on the warrant. It was active. He was a wanted man. And she was about to walk down the aisle toward him. The silence in the room transformed from curious to suffocating. Tiana felt the walls closing in. The reality of her life was crumbling in her hands, one sheet of paper at a time. She flipped to the next page and her breath hitched in her throat. It was a printed screenshot of an insurance claim from a Palm Beach precinct. Attached to it was a high-resolution photo of the ring currently sitting on her finger. The description was undeniable. Cushion cut. Pink sapphire halo. Stolen during a domestic dispute involving the Kensington estate. Status active investigation. Tiana looked down at her hand. A moment ago, that ring had been her scepter. It was the symbol of her elevation above the common people. Now it was just evidence. It was a stolen trinket from a failed marriage that Braden had scavenged like a vulture. She felt a wave of nausea roll through her. She had been waving a felony in people's faces for months. Every time she flashed it for a photo, she was documenting a crime. The sparkle suddenly looked dull and cheap. It did not look like love anymore. It looked like jail time. But the box was not empty yet. There was one final layer to peel back. She reached for the documents at the bottom. These were not about Braden. These were about her. She saw the deed to the family home. She saw the mortgage statements. She saw the foreclosure notices stamped with the bank's urgent red ink. And then she saw the transfer of ownership to Vesper Holdings, LLC. She saw the signature at the bottom. Keisha Vance. Her eyes darted across the page. Her parents did not own the house. They did not own the rental properties. They did not own anything. They were tenants living on her sister's charity. The inheritance she thought she was protecting, the real estate portfolio she had promised Braden, did not exist. It was a mirage constructed by her parents to sell her off to the highest bidder. The room began to spin. The white walls of the bridal suite blurred into a streak of light. The faces of her bridesmaids became distorted masks of judgment. Tiana gripped the edge of the vanity to keep from falling. The reality was crashing down on her with the force of a tidal wave. She was not a wealthy heiress marrying a finance mogul. She was a broke girl with no job and no assets marrying a broke con artist with a gambling addiction. They were two empty shells trying to con each other. She looked at her mother across the room. Patricia was still smiling, unaware that the grenade had gone off. Tiana wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the dress off her body. She had been sold a lie, and she had bought it with everything she had. She was standing in a mansion owned by the sister she hated, wearing a stolen ring given by a man she did not know, surrounded by people she could not pay. The floor felt like it was dissolving beneath her satin heels. For the first time in her life, Tiana Vance was completely and utterly terrified. The fairy tale was over, and the horror movie had just begun. The organ music swelled, filling the cavernous hall of the Chateau Lumiere. It was the sound of tradition and sanctity, but to Tiana it sounded like a funeral dirge. The massive double doors at the back of the room swung open with a theatrical groan. The guests turned in their seats, expecting to see a blushing bride gliding toward her future. What they saw was a woman possessed. Tiana stood at the threshold. Her chest was heaving violently. Her face was wet with tears that ruined her professional makeup, leaving streaks of black mascara running down her cheeks like war paint. To the uninitiated, it looked like the overwhelming emotion of a young woman in love. A collective sigh of adoration rippled through the crowd. My mother, Patricia, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, beaming at what she thought was the pinnacle of her social climbing career. But as Tiana stepped forward, the illusion shattered for anyone paying close attention. She did not walk in time with the music. She did not look at her father, who was waiting to escort her down the aisle. She ignored him completely, leaving him standing there with his arm crooked in empty air. She moved with the speed and intensity of a predator locking onto its kill. The camera moved backward, tracking her face in a tight shot. Her eyes were not soft. They were wide and manic, burning with a fire that could consume the entire building. Her lips were pulled back in a snarl that exposed her teeth. She was not carrying a bouquet of white peonies. In her right hand she gripped the black velvet box, and the sheaf of crumpled papers so hard that her fingernails were digging through the documents. Braden stood at the altar, looking every inch the confident groom. He saw her pace and mistook it for passion. He smiled, his teeth white and predatory, thinking he had finally secured his golden ticket. He spread his arms wide, ready to welcome the woman who would validate his existence and pay his debts. He did not see the papers until she was 3 feet away. Tiana did not slow down as she reached the steps. She lunged. With a scream that sounded less like a human voice and more like a tearing sheet of metal, she threw the entire stack of evidence directly into his face. The impact was visceral. The heavy cardstock of the arrest warrant struck his nose. The foreclosure notices and the police reports exploded outward, creating a cloud of white debris that fluttered around him like a snowstorm of disaster. The guests gasped in unison, a sharp intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. The music screeched to a halt. Braden stumbled back, swatting at the papers, blinking in confusion as the mugshot from Nevada landed face up on his polished shoe. Tiana stood over him, her chest rising and falling. "You are finished!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "You are a liar and a thief, and you are not taking me down with you." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, broken only by the sound of a distant siren getting closer. Braden did not gasp. He did not beg for forgiveness. As the papers fluttered to the marble floor, settling around his shoes like dead leaves, a transformation occurred. The charming smile melted away like wax near a flame, revealing the jagged rot underneath. He looked down at the mugshot, then up at Tiana. He started to laugh. It was a dry, hacking sound that grated against the stunned silence of the room. He brushed a piece of confetti off his shoulder and looked at the crowd with pure, unadulterated contempt. "You think you can humiliate me?" He spat, his voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "You think you are the victim here, Tiana? Look at you. You are a joke." My father, Marcus, stepped forward, his face purple with indignation. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way? You are a criminal." Braden wheeled around, pointing a finger directly at my father's chest. "Shut up, old man. Do not pretend you are high society. I know what you are. I ran your financials last week, hoping to squeeze a little more out of the dowry. You are drowning in debt. You are pathetic. You are just a bunch of broke imposters playing dress-up in a borrowed house, trying to trap a rich husband because you are too lazy to work for your own money." The guests gasped again, but Braden was just getting started. He walked toward Tiana, invading her space. His eyes were cold and dead, and "I was doing you a favor. I was going to give you a name. But you are all the same. You drape yourselves in leased luxury and think it makes you royalty, but underneath the makeup in the rented venue, you are just trash. You are ghetto trash wrapped in silk, trying to sit at a table you were never invited to." The racism hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. It was the slur of a man who believed his whiteness gave him inherent superiority, even when he was the one in handcuffs. He looked at the shocked faces of the investors he had invited, the few legitimate people he had tricked. "These people have nothing," he shouted, gesturing at my family. "They are frauds. They are worse than me. At least I admit I am a gambler. They are just leeches." Tiana stood frozen, the color draining from her face. The man she had worshipped was stripping her naked in front of 300 people. He was vocalizing her deepest insecurity, that she was a fraud, that she was empty. Braden adjusted his cuffs, looking at the approaching security team with a sneer. "Call the police. Go ahead. But remember this, Tiana. You did not leave me. I was leaving you the second I realized the bank account was empty. You were just a mark that didn't pay out." The camera tilted, capturing the vertigo of the moment. The perfect wedding had dissolved into a chaotic nightmare of shouted insults and shattered egos. The mask was off and the monster was real. The wail of sirens cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife. It was not a distant sound. It was immediate and deafening, drowning out the murmurs of the confused crowd. The red and blue strobe lights began to flash against the high stained glass windows, turning the romantic amber lighting of the ballroom into a chaotic disco of law enforcement. Braden stopped speaking mid-insult. His eyes darted to the side exits, but he was too late. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room flew open with enough force to crack the plaster on the walls. "Federal agents, everybody stay where you are!" A voice boomed over a megaphone. A tactical unit swept into the ballroom, moving with a coordinated efficiency that contrasted sharply with the hysterical guests. They were not wearing tuxedos. They were wearing windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI. They moved in a wedge formation, cutting a path through the flower arrangements and the velvet ropes. The guests screamed and scrambled backward, knocking over chairs and wine glasses in a desperate attempt to distance themselves from the groom. "Braden Miller, put your hands in the air," the lead agent shouted, leveling his weapon at the altar. Braden froze. For a split second, he looked like he might try to run. He glanced at the window behind the altar, but he saw the perimeter units waiting on the lawn. The fight drained out of him. He slowly raised his hands, his fake Rolex catching the harsh glare of the tactical lights. Two agents rushed the stage. They spun him around and slammed him face first onto the altar table, right on top of the unlit unity candle. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the silent hall. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and interstate transport of stolen goods." Then the audience reacted. But they did not intervene. They did not help. In a synchronized movement of modern voyeurism, a sea of smartphones rose in the air. The guests were not just witnessing the event, they were broadcasting it. 300 screens lit up, recording the downfall in high definition. People were live streaming on Instagram and TikTok, framing the shot to include the sobbing bride and the handcuffed groom. The comments were scrolling faster than the eye could read. The hashtag was already trending. I watched from the shadows of the balcony, my heart beating in a steady, calm rhythm. This was the moment I had curated. Tiana was standing alone at the altar, her dress pooling around her like a puddle of spilled milk, watching her fiancé being read his Miranda rights. She looked at the guests, hoping for sympathy, but all she saw were camera lenses. She was finally the center of attention, just like she always wanted. She was viral. But she was not trending for her beauty or her wealth. She was trending as the face of the ultimate scam. As the agents dragged Braden down the aisle past the people he had insulted minutes ago, the camera tracked the chaos with a shaky handheld urgency, capturing the raw, unfiltered destruction of the Vance family legacy. The chaos in the ballroom was deafening, but amidst the screaming guests and the shouting agents, my parents stood in a bubble of absolute terrifying silence. Marcus and Patricia Vance looked like statues carved from grief and stupidity. They were frozen in place, their bodies rigid, as if the very air around them had turned into concrete. My father was watching the agents drag Braden toward the exit, but his eyes were unfocused. He was not seeing a criminal being arrested. He was seeing his retirement plan walking out the door in handcuffs. He was doing the math in his head and coming up with a negative number that would bury him. The $100,000 they had stolen from my equity, the money they had forged my signature to get, was gone. It had vanished into the black hole of Braden's gambling debts, and it was never coming back. But it was my mother who truly captured the magnitude of the disaster. She stood near the front row, clutching her pearls so hard the strand threatened to snap. Her face, usually a mask of haughty superiority, had collapsed. The color had drained from her skin, leaving her looking gray and ghostly under the expensive chandeliers. I watched her closely. I could see the gears turning in her mind, grinding against the rust of her denial. She was replaying every conversation. She was remembering every time she had sneered at me and praised him. She was realizing that the loan documents she forged were not a bridge to a better life. They were a suicide note for her lifestyle. She had mortgaged the roof over her head to fund a gambler's addiction. She had committed a felony to buy stocks in a company that did not exist. The realization hit her like a physical blow. There would be no penthouse. There would be no country club redemption. There was only the looming eviction notice and the potential prison sentence for fraud. She looked around the room at her friends, the social circle she had tried so hard to impress. They were not looking at her with envy anymore. They were looking at her with pity and morbid curiosity. They were whispering behind their hands, sharing the livestream link that showed the Vance family imploding in real time. Her perfectly applied foundation seemed to crack under the strain of her expression. Her mouth hung slightly open, a silent scream of despair that would never be heard. She looked small. She looked frail. For the first time in her life, Patricia Vance looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had gambled everything on a lie and rolled snake eyes. She blinked once, a slow, heavy movement, as if she was trying to wake up from a nightmare. But when she opened her eyes again, the handcuffs were still there. The police were still there. And I was still watching from the balcony, holding the deed to the house she was about to lose. She was not just heartbroken. She was destitute. And the horror of that poverty was more frightening to her than any prison cell. It took exactly 7 days for the wheels of justice to grind my parents into dust. I parked my car under the shade of an oak tree 3 houses down from the property. I did not turn off the engine. I just pressed the button on the door panel and watched the tinted window slide down with a silent mechanical hum. The air outside was crisp and indifferent to the tragedy unfolding across the street. A sheriff's cruiser sat in the driveway, its lights off but its presence screaming authority. 2 deputies stood on the front porch. They were not there to ask questions. They were there to execute an order. My father Marcus opened the door. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a week. He was wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. I had never seen my father in sweatpants before noon. He was shouting, waving his arms, trying to use the bluster that had worked on waiters and valets all his life. But you cannot bully a court order. The deputy simply shook his head and held up a sheet of bright neon orange paper. It was the color of danger, the color of road signs and life rafts, the color of eviction. Then my mother appeared. She was not wearing her pearls. She was not wearing makeup. She looked small and frail, standing in the shadow of the doorframe. She saw the tape going up. She saw the staple gun flash in the sunlight. Thwack! 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 The sound carried down the street like gunshots. They were being removed. The bank had accelerated the foreclosure immediately after I filed the fraud report. Since the equity loan was obtained through criminal forgery and the underlying mortgage had not been paid in over a year, the asset was being seized. The house was no longer their sanctuary. It was a crime scene. I watched the realization hit them. My father slumped against the brickwork, defeated. My mother covered her mouth to stifle a sob, looking frantically up and down the street. She was looking for an audience or perhaps a savior. She scanned the road expecting a neighbor to intervene, or expecting me to swoop in with my checkbook and make the bad men go away. Her eyes swept over my car, but she did not see me behind the glare of the windshield. She only saw her own reflection in the metal of the vehicles passing her by. They had forged my signature to buy time, but they had only bought their own destruction. They were now homeless, penniless, and facing an FBI investigation. I watched the deputy hand my father a clipboard. Marcus signed it with a shaking hand. It was the first honest signature he had put on a document in months. I shifted the car into drive. I did not feel joy. I did not feel sadness. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a ledger finally balancing out to 0. I pressed the button and the window rolled up, sealing me inside my quiet, controlled world. I drove away, leaving them standing on the porch of a house they never truly owned, staring at the orange sticker that marked the end of their era. I had my foot on the brake, ready to leave them to the fate they had manufactured, but my mother spotted the glint of my car. Panic gave her a burst of hysterical energy. She sprinted across the lawn, her house slippers scuffing against the asphalt, until she threw herself against my passenger door. She banged on the glass with frantic, desperate palms, leaving greasy smears on the pristine window. Her face was pressed against the tint, her eyes wild and swimming with tears. "Keisha," she screamed, her voice muffled by the soundproofing. "Open the door. You cannot leave us here. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood." I looked at her. Really looked at her. For 30 years, seeing my mother upset would have sent me into immediate fix-it mode. I would have opened the wallet. I would have made the calls. But today I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger through a television screen. I lowered the window exactly 3 inches, just enough to hear her but not enough for her to reach inside. "Mom, please, step back from the vehicle," I said. My voice was flat, monotone. She grasped the top of the glass, her fingers curling over the edge like claws. "Keisha, listen to me. We made a mistake. But we did it for the family. We did it for Tiana. How can you be so cold? I am your mother. I gave you life. I wiped your tears. Does that mean nothing to you? You are destroying us over money. Just drop the charges and pay off the lien. You have plenty. You can fix this." I took a slow breath, inhaling the leather scent of the car interior that I paid for. "That is your problem, Patricia. You think being a mother is a lifetime get-out-of-jail-free card. You think because you gave birth to me, you own me. You own my labor. You own my credit score. You own my future." I did not call her mom. The shift in terminology made her flinch. "I am not destroying you." I continued, my eyes locking onto hers with laser intensity. "I am simply stopping you from destroying me. For 10 years I have been the ATM. I have been the safety net. I bought this house. I paid for the cars. I paid for the groceries. And how did you repay me? You forged my signature. You stole my identity. You tried to bankrupt me to buy a wedding for a sister who despises me." "But we love you," she wailed, the tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. "No, you don't," I said. "You love what I can provide. You love the utility of me. You do not love the person. You only love the payout. If I lost my job tomorrow, you would not offer me a bed. You would ask me why the check stopped coming." She opened her mouth to argue, to spin another web of guilt, but I cut her off. "You committed a felony against your own daughter. That is not love. That is predation. I am done being your prey." I pressed the button. The window rose with a decisive hum, forcing her to snatch her fingers back to avoid being crushed. She stood there screaming my name, slapping the glass helplessly as I took my foot off the brake. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I drove forward into a life that finally belonged only to me. The internet is a cruel historian. It does not forgive, and it certainly does not forget. For Tiana, the wedding livestream did not just result in a cancelled marriage, it resulted in a digital scarlet letter. She became a meme overnight. The clip of her screaming at the altar was remixed with techno music and shared millions of times on TikTok. She was dubbed the bride of fraud. But viral fame does not pay the bills, especially when the bills are legal fees and vendor debts. With Braden in federal custody and our parents evicted, Tiana was left holding the invoice for a wedding that never legally happened. The caterers sued her. The florist sent debt collectors. She had to liquidate her identity to survive. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she spent weeks dragging giant IKEA bags filled with her designer clothes to consignment shops. The Chanel bags went first. Then the Louboutins with the red soles worn down from partying. She haggled with pawn shop owners over bracelets she had once claimed cost thousands, only to be told they were worth scrap metal prices. It was a fire sale of her ego. Every handbag sold was a piece of her armor stripped away, leaving her exposed to the cold wind of reality. She tried to find another rich boyfriend, of course. She prowled the usual bars in Buckhead. But her reputation was radioactive. No man with a net worth wanted to be associated with the woman from that video. She was a liability, not a trophy. So she had to do the unthinkable. She had to get a job. And since she had spent her 20s cultivating an attitude instead of a skill set, her options were limited. I saw her 3 months later. I did not go inside, but I parked my car across the lot from the discount grocery chain where she had landed. The camera should focus on the texture of her reality. Gone was the custom lace and the silk that rippled like water. In its place was a stiff lime green polyester vest. It was ill-fitting, bunching up around her shoulders and hanging loosely at her waist. Underneath, she wore a generic white polo shirt that had been washed too many times. She stood behind register 4. Her movements were mechanical. Beep, beep, beep. She picked up a carton of eggs, scanned it, and slid it down the metal ramp. Her nails were no longer long and manicured. They were short, unpolished, and practical. A customer, a woman who looked exactly like Tiana used to look, snapped her fingers at her, demanding a price check. I watched Tiana's face. I expected the old fire. I expected her to roll her eyes, to make a snide comment, to walk away. But she didn't. She just slumped her shoulders and mumbled a quiet apology. She looked tired. It was a bone-deep exhaustion born of standing on her feet for 8 hours a day for minimum wage. The entitlement had been beaten out of her by the harsh rhythm of the working-class life she had always mocked. She was no longer the princess of the Vance family. She was just employee number 429, scanning coupons and bagging groceries while the ghost of her dream life faded into the background. The glow of the flat-screen television was the only light in my living room. I sat in the corner of my beige sectional with my legs tucked under me. The news anchor, a woman with perfect hair and a serious expression, looked directly into the camera. She began to speak the epitaph of Braden Miller's fraudulent career. Tonight in federal court, the man dubbed the Buckhead Casanova learned his fate. Braden Miller, 34, was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for a sophisticated scheme of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The report cut to footage of Braden being led out of the courthouse. He was not wearing his Italian suits anymore. He was shackled, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with his complexion. He tried to hide his face from the cameras, ducking his head like a coward. The anchor continued. Prosecutors revealed that the Vance family was not his only victim. Miller had been running a romance-based Ponzi scheme for 5 years, targeting over a dozen families across the Southeast. He defrauded victims of nearly $5 million, using the proceeds to fund a lavish lifestyle and a crippling gambling addiction. So we were just number 13. That sting of being just another mark on a long list faded, quickly replaced by the relief that we were the ones who finally stopped him. If I hadn't intervened, he would have drained my parents dry and moved on to the next desperate family with a naive daughter. The judge called him a predator who preyed on the aspirations of the middle class. A predator who was now caged. I watched the screen as they showed a montage of his victims. Blurred faces of crying women. My sister was not shown, thankfully, but I knew she was watching somewhere in her small apartment. The segment ended. The weather report began. I picked up the remote control. I did not need to see the forecast. My storm was over. I pressed the power button. The room plunged into a comfortable silence. I reached for my glass of Pinot Noir. The wine was a deep, rich red, swirling against the crystal as I raised it to my lips. It tasted like oak and berries. It tasted like victory. The debt was settled. The books were balanced. And for the first time in a long time, the ledger was closed. The sliding glass doors of my penthouse opened with a smooth, almost silent hush. I stepped out onto the terrace. The air was crisp at this altitude. 40 stories above Peachtree Street, the noise of the city was just a low hum. It was a white noise that sounded like the ocean. It was the sound of the world moving below me while I stood above it, untouched and unbothered. For the first time in 10 years, my home was actually a sanctuary. There were no frantic phone calls interrupting my evening. There were no texts demanding money disguised as emergencies. There were no guilt trips waiting for me in my inbox. My phone sat on the marble kitchen island, silent and face down. I had blocked the numbers. I had filtered the emails. The silence was not lonely. It was luxurious. It was the most expensive thing I owned, and I had paid for it with the currency of boundaries. I walked to the edge of the balcony and rested my hands on the cold railing. Below me, Atlanta stretched out like a sprawling circuit board of gold and amber light. The cars were ribbons of red and white moving through the arteries of the highway. It was beautiful. For years, I had been too busy putting out fires to appreciate the view. I had been too busy working to pay for a house I did not live in and a lifestyle I did not enjoy. I had been a slave to the concept of family obligation. People tell you that you cannot choose your family. They say blood is thicker than water. That is a lie designed to keep victims trapped in cycles of abuse. You can choose your family, and more importantly, you can choose to amputate the parts of your life that are gangrenous. My parents and Tiana were not a support system. They were a malignancy. They were a tumor that had attached itself to my finances and my self-worth, feeding off me until I was nearly empty. I had performed the surgery myself. It was brutal, and it was bloody, and it was public, but the patient had survived. The cancer was gone. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I looked at the empty chair beside me. A year ago, I would have felt the need to fill it. I would have felt the pressure to find a partner to validate my existence just like Tiana did. But now I realized that solitude was a privilege. I did not need a husband to prove I was valuable. I did not need a crowd to prove I was loved. I owned this penthouse. I owned the deed to the venue where my sister's dreams died. I owned my future. I turned away from the railing and looked back into my living room. It was warm and perfectly appointed and completely mine. The drama was over. The credits had rolled. The audience had gone home. And for the first time in my life, I was the only star on the stage. I turned away from the skyline and looked directly at the camera lens. My gaze locked with yours, breaking the invisible barrier that had separated my story from your reality. I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking that I was too harsh. You are thinking that family is sacred and that forgiveness is a virtue. You are thinking that despite everything, I should have written the check. I should have signed the loan. I should have let them ruin me because that is what good daughters do. But let me ask you a question. At what point does loyalty become self-destruction? At what point does being a good sister mean being a bad person to yourself? For years, I let the concept of blood relation act as a shackle. I let the phrase, "but we are family," justify theft. I let it justify emotional abuse. I let it justify the erasure of my own needs. I was not a daughter to them. I was a resource. I was a coal mine they were digging out until the mountain collapsed. There is a dangerous myth in our culture that says you owe your parents for your existence, that you owe your siblings your stability. That is a lie. You owe them respect. You owe them kindness. But you do not owe them your future. You do not owe them your credit score. And you certainly do not owe them your sanity. Toxic people do not get a pass just because they share your DNA. A poison is still a poison, whether you drink it from a stranger's cup or a crystal goblet handed to you by your mother. If I had stayed, if I had signed those papers, I would be destitute right now. I would be sharing a jail cell or a shelter with people who never learned the word enough. I chose to cut the rope. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It felt like cutting off a limb. But look at me now. I am standing in a home that is paid for. I am living a life that is peaceful. The silence in this room is not empty. It is full of dignity. It is full of the self-respect I had to claw back from their greedy hands. If you are watching this and you feel that familiar knot in your stomach because you are the Keisha of your family, listen to me. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to succeed without dragging a dead weight behind you. Do not let them call you selfish for surviving. Do not let them call you cruel for protecting what you built. The only people who get upset when you set boundaries are the ones who benefited from you having none. Let them be upset. Let them scream. Let them post about you on social media. You just keep driving. You roll up the window. You lock the door, and you never look back. I smiled. It was not a cold smile anymore. It was a warm, genuine expression of a woman who had saved herself. The camera began to pull back, slowly widening the frame. I stood there in the center of my beautiful life, bathed in the golden glow of the penthouse lights. I was alone, but I was whole. The city lights twinkled behind me like applause. The screen faded slowly to black, leaving only the echo of my truth in the darkness. This story illustrates a harsh but necessary truth. Shared DNA is not a license for exploitation. We often cling to toxic family dynamics out of guilt, believing that loyalty requires infinite sacrifice. However, Keisha's journey proves that financial boundaries are a form of self-respect. You cannot save people who are determined to destroy themselves, and you certainly should not bankroll their delusions. True love protects, it does not prey. Walking away from family members who view you as an asset rather than a person is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of survival. If you agree that your peace is worth more than toxic loyalty, drop A in the comments and subscribe for more stories of justice.